All right, let's shift a little bit to some religions.
Okay.
You are a Christian conservative.
That's correct.
Just that phrase triggers a certain amount of people. So first off, what is a Christian conservative?
Yeah, which always stuns me. So I do a lot of campus tour. I'll tell you a quick story. A lot of campus tours, and I go through my litany of what I call hard truths told by Charlie Kirk, and I'll say, socialism is the greatest killer of humanity in the last 100 years, and I'll say free enterprise is the greatest economic system ever. And then I'll say 3 words, and it drives them so crazy. I say, God is real. And it's like they just start shaking. They're, the left, they don't know how to handle it. And half the place loves it, half the place hates it. I don't know why that's so triggering. So I'm a Christian, first and foremost. I believe, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and he came down, and he died for all our sins, and we have a good documentation of that, and we could debate and discuss that, whatever. But as a Christian, I believe that, we are called to try to advance the kingdom of God and the ministry of Jesus Christ to as many people as possible and as peacefully as possible, obviously, right? So that's how I try to live my own personal life and make my own personal decisions. As a conservative, I'd say...
Let me pause there for a second.
Yeah.
So I don't see you proselytizing religion, though, in the public way. I've heard you speak before.
Sure.
And I've never heard you push that. So
I say it every so often when asked, but I look at my speaking no different than sometimes doing a job, right? So a plumber, electrician is not going to tell every person he turns around the corner like, hey, have you heard the great news of Jesus Christ? You know what I mean? So you don't want to be too offsetting and off-putting, but I also try to, through some of my platforms, talk about my personal beliefs, no matter how triggering it might be to other people. And on my campus tours, I try to, advance. But of course, I could probably do a better job of it. But with that being said, I would consider myself more as a conservatarian, which I find to be a new breed of, ideology, which you and I talked about, and some people have already been labeling themselves as such. And I find no contradiction between my Christian worldview and my political philosophy. In fact, I find great amount of synchrony actually between what I believe theologically and what I believe spiritually and religiously, to also what I advocate for politically, which is essentially the non-aggression principle and believing in productive people and free societies should be able to make your choices as you see fit as long as you're not harming someone else.
How did Christians end up as so much of the butt of what the left hates? Because you can open up every day another BuzzFeed article mocking
Isn't it horrible?
white Christians and Mike and HuffPo and
they all love me, by the way.
Oh yeah, they must love you.
They must. The fact it's nuts.
But how did that happen?
Well, so I think what happened is that Christian conservatives fell for a trap that they really should have rejected, which is we might hold these truths very near and dear to our heart, theologically and biblically and spiritually and religiously. But I think where the line was crossed is in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where we tried to impose those beliefs through government policy, where people then inherently have a rejection to it. Similarly, how people are rejecting the left, imposing their crazy worldview upon us, right? I think that was a big mistake because it created this kind of counter-revolution, which is, I don't want to have to live the way some Christian in Alabama wants me to live. Does that make sense? So it's the imposition of those values through legislation and government, which is something I don't necessarily support, right? So I try to always advocate for every one of my political positions through a secular worldview, because that is the vast majority of people, and that's actually the government system that we have all decided to create. We do have a separation of church and state, and we should support that. With that being said, I can still have my own personal opinions, my own personal ways to go about changing public policy. But when we start to say we should support this law because it's the Christian thing to do, that is, I think, that has turned people off for the last 30 years.
What does it say also about Christians that, we talked about gay marriage before, that there was a shift, that there actually has been a shift. Now, you're basically arguing it's a political shift or a utilitarian shift.
Yes.
You're sort of giving me just the realist argument.
Yeah.
But is there something else going on there too, where there is something
could be.
related to tolerance in the truest sense?
Yeah, and here, this is the other problem with Christians, and me being a card-carrying member of this community, and I try my hardest and I fail, and I'm around a lot of these Christians, and I sometimes fall into it, is this legalism, right? Is that I'm somehow better than you because I'm a Christian. And I really think that's done such a disservice to the Christian community, especially the Christian conservative community. It's this sanctimonious approach to lifestyle that I find to be really off-putting to a lot of non-believers. and people say, well, I don't want to be a Christian because they're always going to talk down to me, or they're going to make me live by this set of beliefs, or they think they're better than I am. It's the number one critique I get. It's not that, oh, I don't believe Jesus Christ is actually the Son of God, or I don't believe the Bible. Those are actually things I think that can be ironed out. It's more so like I've always been talked down to, or when I was a young kid, I was in Catholic school and they gave me these 15 things I couldn't do, and because of that I rebelled and rejected. So I think this idea that actually Jesus Christ advocated for, which is, hey, I dined with the tax collectors. I was best friends with the prostitutes, right? Like, I never thought that they were any better than my disciples, right? And of course, I don't live this out the best I should, but where Christians have gotten it wrong is this fierce fire and brimstone legalism. Thou shalt all homosexual, like that's wrong, man.
Yeah.
That's not what the teachings and the evidence we have of Jesus Christ's life ever taught us. He was welcoming, he was tolerant, he was accepting. He had standards. He was fierce when it came to eternity and the standards of God, but he wasn't afraid to go chill with tax collectors, which were considered like the lowest form of individual possible in the Middle East during that time.
Right.
And so I think we as Christians can learn a lot of that in modern society.
Listen, when we wrap this thing up, you want to go have lunch with some prostitutes?
I mean, if they want to hear about the good news of Jesus Christ, but even so, right? Some people are like, oh, but the point being is we as Christians have to do a better job of not being the sanctimonious, moral conjecturers, which we get labeled at so much.
So when you see a guy like Shapiro or a guy like Prager's more...
They're my heroes. I love them.
Prager basically a secular Jew at this point, but grew up Orthodox. Shapiro obviously...
is an observant religious.
Observant Orthodox Jew. You guys basically, from what I can tell, agree on pretty much everything politically. You're obviously more Trump than Shapiro is.
And Prager's pretty Trump.
On any given day. Prager definitely is more pro-Trump. But does any of your religious differences, I know that doesn't matter to you in terms of policy,
Sure.
That's very obvious, but just in terms of like your humanity or the way your worldview, does any of that matter to you?
I've had wonderful discussions with Dennis Prager about what he believes theologically. And I mean, look, first of all, I think Dennis Prager is like the Yoda of the conservative movement. He's like unbelievably brilliant.
One tall Jew.
Isn't that? I know, exactly. He's fantastic. And same with Ben. I mean, I listen to their stuff every single day, and Prager University does a heroic job. But it doesn't bother me at all, but I always challenge, right? So I challenge, religious and observant Jews with some pretty good questions, I think, because I'm very big into apologetics of the New Testament and the Christian, the evidence for, Christianity. I ask questions. I'll say, do you believe Paul existed? Do you think Paul of Sardis existed? And they'll say, yes. I'll say, don't you think it's kind of like weird that a Roman Jew dropped his whole amazing lifestyle and like went all in for this Jesus Christ thing and then got persecuted, put in jail 6 times, and then reverse crucified? Like, would someone do that if they actually didn't believe this? That's a provocative question, obviously, right? But I love that. And I love that kind of, discussion. And look, Paul said very clearly in the New Testament, bless the Jews. These are your brothers. There is no New Testament without the Old Testament. So we agree, with the Jewish people on all that. And look, I think we need more Jews to actually become more observant and to understand the roots of the Torah and the roots of what God commanded through Moses and through David and the major and minor prophets. And I have such great respect for them because they've done a great job of, I think, awakening people that there are, Jewish conservatives out there, and it's okay to believe these things.
Well, it's interesting because as someone that doesn't come from this from a religious perspective, I agree with the wider principle that you're pushing here, which is that some of these minority communities, so in this case you're talking about Jews, but you referenced black people earlier, which I want to talk a little bit about why you're working with Candace. But now I see it with the Asian community. I don't know if you just saw in the last couple of days, there's this email that got leaked from Google where they basically were saying we're going to hire people but not white men, or Asian women will be treated like white women, or something to that effect, like this lunacy.
It's horribly racist, too.
It's racist. It's the real racism.
It's the real racism, though.
Yeah.
It's this kind of like, there's this ranking of oppression Olympics, like somehow your skin color makes you somewhat more, worthy of a position in a company or in a university because you've been through more just because you look different.
Or the scary part, especially for the Asian community, is that your skin color and the way you look makes you less worthy because you're going to work real hard and you're going to
make the right decisions.
Make all the right decisions.
I mean, make no mistake, it's like an anti-Asian American worldview that the left has now essentially embraced. It's like, oh, they've been successful enough, now we must discriminate against them so we can help the other. It's like, it's lunacy. But going back to your point of the Christian conservative kind of worldview, I think that there's a lot of us that hold these beliefs very personal, but also that's kind of where we draw the line is, you know, we have these personal beliefs and they're going to dictate how we want to live individually, but how do we advocate for a society that allows the most amount of people to advocate for their own personal beliefs, whatever they might be, as long as it doesn't harm someone else?
So your basic argument, and I think you hit on this a little bit earlier, would be that part of the reason that Europe is crumbling, which it is crumbling.
The West is crumbling except for America.
Yeah, I mean, we're taping this. It's going to go up next week, but we're taping this. Today is the 3-year anniversary of, well, Charlie Hebdo was a couple of days ago, 3 years, but today was the day that they finally caught the guy, and then there was the shooting at the kosher supermarket in the Paris suburbs and all that. Today, a different supermarket was burned down. I mean, this is still happening in Paris right now. And this is happening all across Europe. We know what's going on in Sweden and all this. Your basic premise would be that if they had held on to some of their Judeo-Christian values instead of trading them in for what do you think?
Secularism, essentially statism, right?
But yet you're also a secularist, which is an interesting.
Well, no, but no, I don't think it's contradictory, because I would make an argument that actually the separation of church and state found in America has helped the church. Mm-hmm. We still have the highest church-going rates in the West. We still have the highest levels of private philanthropy. We have more churches opening than ever before. The evangelical community is growing in most states. As Alan Dershowitz would say, the separation of church and state has been the best thing for the church because it's not imposed upon people. It's not mandatory. Mm-hmm. As you and I both agree, as soon as you start to tell someone to do something, it becomes a lot less sexy and appealing. Yeah. It actually, you want to rebel against it. You want to reject it. I would argue Europe, through their social welfare programs, have deteriorated the church. As soon as they start to say government is going to take care of people, government is going to be the most important thing in your life, government's going to fix these vastly complex social problems, then all of a sudden the church and the individual becomes far less significant. As Dennis Prager says, the larger the government, the smaller the citizen. You're seeing that play out in France and Spain and Portugal and Italy, where you have individual philanthropy disappear, where you have business startups totally evaporate. And the final point is what it really lends itself to is more dangerous ideologies to take form, such as radical Islam, which is, I think, one of the most dangerous widespread ideological movements happening in the West that no one is talking about. And here's what I can understand. I mean, you're a gay guy. I mean, I would probably be worried if I start to see, radical Islam start to take root in Europe, right?
Yeah. You're a Christian. I'd be worried too.
No, I mean, trust me, I'm on that program, okay? They want us both dead, my friend, right? I mean, and that's something I find to be horribly inconsistent with the left, is they try to be the champions of all these minority groups and all these supposed oppressed groups, yet here they are kind of joining forces with countries and movements and, theocratic fascists in the Middle East that give homosexuals flying lessons on the top of buildings.
All right, so then how do we, I spent, I think, a good chunk, especially the first year of this show, trying to talk about radical Islam, making a distinction between radical Islam and the nominal Muslim person who practices their faith privately, however they do, just like most people. I try to separate Islam as a set of ideas worthy of criticism, as Christianity is and Judaism is, and Republicanism and all of that, versus people, versus criticizing people and treating people differently. I think a lot of people in our space have tried to do that, and you don't get a lot of credit for it, but okay, fine, I don't need bonus credit. But how do we talk about radical Islam in an honest way?
And I do. There is a differentiation that needs to be drawn, but we also do need to talk about the broader implementation of an Islamic government and worldview, right? So Islam, at its core, has always been and will always be tied into the state. And as soon as they can demonstrate that they can be a majority in a country and not be a theocratic government, then I'll start to cede some territory against that. Yeah. So for example, Saudi Arabia, right? So if you are a Christian in Saudi Arabia, you lose your head. If you're a Jew, they'll find your family and kill all of you. There's something wrong about that, right? So I think we need to draw a great critique of that. Same in Iran, which is Shia, and Saudi, which is Sunni. And there's something really, I think, not correct about in modern society, that you have obviously a Muslim majority country and there's no Christians and no Jews and no churches and no synagogues. There's something very intolerant about that. However, people that want to reform Islam, I'm your biggest advocates, right? Yeah. People that want to go through a reformation of Islam and try to differentiate that no, Islam does not have to be tied to the state, and yes, Islam can be tolerant of Christians and Jews and gays and the modern feminist movement, and they should be allowed to vote and drive and, you know, be able to make decisions that they see fit and not have to wear a full hijab. I want those Muslims to succeed.
Yeah.
I'm frightened that the more radical voices, which are in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, are actually getting more of an audience. They're creating, you know, sectors of Europe that are quite troubling, that are advocating for the advancement of these more dangerous ideologies that support honor killings and don't think women should have the right to drive or to vote or to be able to have representation in any sort of form of government. And so I think a broader critique of Islam needs to be put forth because they've been doing it against Christianity for the last 100 years. I walk into a lecture hall and I hear about how horribly intolerant Christians are and how they're terrible people. Fine, hard stop. You go to the Vatican, a woman is allowed to wear shorts and, you know, a cut-off t-shirt. You go to Mecca and you're a Christian, you get your head cut off.
I mean, you literally can't go.
No, you literally not allowed.
That say you're not allowed.
No, they're literally not allowed. So there's a discussion that needs to happen where a broader reformation is necessary, but the more radical voices of Islam are actually succeeding right now. You look at the most viral members of the YouTube community in the Sunni, you know, Saudi region, but they're the ones that are advocating for a holy war and the extermination of Christians. They're the ones that are really taking root. We have to support, we have to reinforce, and we have to really encourage the more the reformist Muslims to get a broader, you know, platform, but I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to do a little bit of it here.
No, you've done a great job.
I've helped some reformers and some ex-Muslims and things like that, but the problem is that they're constantly undercut by their own, supposedly their own people. The left, every time one of them talks about this, they say you're a sellout or you're evil or, you know, whatever.
But it does beg the question, and like that the center of their faith is the most intolerant city in the world. Someone's got to take a broad stand against that, and maybe we'll see it in the next 100 years. But Hamad bin Salman, you know, the new crown prince of Saudi Arabia, is trying to do some more, you know, modern changes. But you're also seeing extraordinary radical voices in Saudi Arabia continually rise up. You're seeing protests in Iran, which is great. But then you're seeing a lot of the Western world not stand with these protests. You see President Trump has done a great job with it. Obama, who is totally silent. So look, Islam in general, there's wonderful Muslim friends that I have and productive members of the American community that embrace this idea that you can hold your beliefs without having to have them pushed through a state, which is great. But you're also seeing the exact opposite with the, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood taking further root in Egypt and in Turkey. You're seeing, you know, Saudi Arabia want to continue its influence throughout the Arabian Peninsula. It's going to be a conflict of ideas, and it's the largest religion, I believe, in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, 1.2 billion people. Yeah. Christianity's right up against, but I would argue that Islam has a lot more power in countries than Christianity does. It's a reformation that needs to happen.
So is the demographic time bomb in Europe, is it already too late?
It's troubling.
In a way?
It's very troubling. So as a byproduct of supporting social welfare programs in the 60s and 70s that deteriorated the influence of the Catholic Church and in Protestantism throughout Europe, and really just kind of making people so apathetic towards private philanthropy, apathetic towards value creation. Entrepreneurship rates disappeared, and you really created a lazy European society. I hate to say it, but they are not highly productive people. They take the month of August off. They have very little ambition. They're okay being average. That's not the society I want to live in. America's always been aspirational. We've been the most productive. We've been the risk takers. We've been the entrepreneurs. So because of that, they've laid themselves to be remarkably vulnerable to a takeover culturally and demographically. And you're starting to see that with the millions of relocations from the Middle East of people that don't hold these views that the Europeans hold. And honestly, they come from a background, whether it be Syria or Jordan or Yemen or Oman. Yemen, there's a huge humanitarian crisis happening. They've known nothing but government being Islamic. Mm-hmm. And so they inherently support that. But if they want to go through a reformation and they can demonstrate they can do that, great. I'm not seeing that, though. I'm seeing vast demographic clashes happening all throughout Europe.
There's also an interesting generational piece to this, which is that you find that a lot of the older people that came from those countries, you know, 30 years ago, they actually are more westernized, and their children are now, they're sort of making up that there was something imaginarily great about Saddam.
That's correct.
About where their parents came from.
We need to reform rebuild the caliphate, and very dangerous, right? And so you look at the Reformation that Christianity rightfully went through in the 1500s and 1600s and 1700s. It's as soon as you embrace the idea of personal freedom and individual liberty, and you try to restrict the state. So put yourself in the seat of the founding fathers. They intentionally removed any sort of mention of Christendom in the Constitution, which ended up being the best thing for Christianity, which created the most Christian nation in the world, which is America. Think about how ironic that is, right? Yeah. Whereas Europe didn't always do that. They actually created these theocratic governments that led way to, horrible conflict and, ethno-nationalism, and eventually in the 60s and 70s, like I mentioned, the huge proliferation of the welfare state, which was the worst decision Europe ever made. They turned a highly productive people into a mediocre, lazy society that rejected all sorts of religion and any sort of, connection to higher being, and has now led themselves to a demographic takeover that I think is for the worst. Some people think it's for the better. I just don't see any evidence of that. Right. But again, there's nothing. And I get criticized as being a racist and all this. I'm not. I'm talking about a set of ideas that, when implemented through the state, have proven to be extremely dangerous to human rights and to economic productivity and private property rights and really human dignity.
So when you've mentioned the phrase oppression Olympics a couple of times, which obviously I totally buy in on.
Which was from your video. I stole it from you, by the way.
Well, I think I stole it from Faisal Saeed Al-Mutar, and he probably stole it from somebody, so that's how these ideas get around. But this idea of this intersectional nonsense.
Which is all nonsense.
Do you think that the average left person in America that says they're a feminist and they're for all, do you think that they don't recognize any of the stuff that you just said about Islam?
They obviously don't talk about it, right? They might recognize it, they might know about it, they might be able to answer it in a Trivial Pursuit game. But the question is here, so there's the International Feminist Society, which is growing huge on campus, and I always challenge them. They advocate for women's rights across the world, and then they're like right next to the Muslim Student Association, which is fine. They should be friends. That's okay. But why are they not demonstrating widespread protests against how women are treated in Saudi Arabia? But the International Feminist Society is protesting against Israel.
Yeah.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
It's because intersectionality, it's like they have this weird construct that we must advocate against Israel because Israel's a friend of America and America hates women. It's like this weird web that
America hates women.
I need this big map where they kind of try. It doesn't make any sense. But where is the outrage? They say there's outrage when I challenge them. Oh yeah, we're really outraged about it. Yeah, okay, sure. But no. Where's the Oprah Winfrey's, right? Where's the Hillary Clintons who spoke multiple times in Saudi Arabia and took millions of dollars from them, right? Where women can't drive, where now they can drive, and that's going to be a real disaster. No, it is, because all of a sudden they're just wait for the moms to get your hands up there. Women are.
Wait, what do you mean?
Oh, because they're going to have a total religious clash about this. Because Hamad bin Salman said by decree that women can drive, and there's going to be all these religious fundamentalists that are not going to allow it to happen, and it's going to be a total conflict. They were bragging that women are allowed to go to movies now, that, to show you how medieval Saudi Arabia is, right? But anyway, Hillary Clinton made this her pinnacle, point of her campaign is I'm going to really have good relations with Saudi Arabia. Her foundation took tens of millions of dollars. Here was a woman that ran on the idea of feminist representation, right? And she can't critique Saudi Arabia once, right? But she critiques Israel for the settlements, right? So I think there's unbelievable hypocrisy there. But it's not just Saudi Arabia, which I'm focusing on. It's Egypt, it's Iran, it's Iraq, which is changing, it's Syria, it's Jordan, it's Oman, it's Yemen. The only countries that get it right are Qatar, right? And maybe the UAE. But you have a geographic disposition of hundreds of millions of square miles where women cannot vote, women cannot own property, women cannot start businesses, women cannot serve in government, men have total and absolute control over society. Gays, they asked Ahmadinejad, they said, how do you treat...
We don't have it.
No, yeah. How do you treat gays in your society? We do not have homosexuals in our country. Well, that's great. Where's the LGBT international society protesting against that, right?
Yeah.
It's like they have this kind of handshake, we're not going to mention this, it's all good. That can't stand anymore.
Right. And then what country do they hate the most? Of course, it's Israel, where
gays are open, openly productive members of society. I think they can marry in Israel. I'm not sure, but the West has been the best to women and to gays, and yet they want to destroy the West. Which doesn't make any sense to me.
By the way, you mentioned settlements a minute ago. I think that Jesus guy you referenced before lived in a town called Bethlehem. And where is that?
He was born in Bethlehem.
That's in the West Bank.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah. Minor details here, right?
Yeah. But history, though, is just lost on people, right? Is that to me, that's one of the most
it's horrible
things. It's just that people don't know basics about history.
Well, even it's the basics, but it's just the ignorance of understanding the blessings we have to live in Western civilization. and how unique what we really have here as a country. And it's being taught in our universities how America's a racist, xenophobic, imperialist, horrible country. And you really have to try. It takes effort to try to make that argument. Because America has been one of the greatest, if not one of the greatest ideas ever implemented in human history and civil society. It's had more respect for human rights. It's had more economic productivity. We have freed more people from serfdom and from bondage than any other country. We've voluntarily sent our citizens and our civilians and our soldiers to die for the freedoms of others without asking for anything in return. You look at the Korean War, we send, our boys from Iowa, Kansas, South Carolina, and Florida to go die in the Korean Peninsula, 50,000 of them, so that South Korea can exist. We ask for nothing in return. If we were imperialists, we're the worst imperialists ever, right? And so, yet it takes the effort to really look at history and say that we're a horrible place. And this is what the modern American left is trying to do is, like, remember when I said in the beginning of the video, we have a choice. We can either go the way of Europe and totally fundamentally transform this country and embrace a set of ideas we've never had, or we can defend, respect, and advance American ideas here and really try to make the 21st century the greatest we've ever had.
Is there an inherent risk in some of that, though, that yes, there are things like South Korea that work out? There's also a lot of instances.
We talk foreign policy, sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of instances like
Iraq, we've had
by the
tons of blunders. I mean, Iraq War was a total mistake.
Yeah.
It was a disaster.
So that's just the inherent risk in this, basically?
No,
even though that was sanctioned, by the way, by Congress and the Senate and the United Nations.
It wasn't actually an effective war of authorization. It was a conflict. But so what I meant there is a broader point that throughout the 20th century, America has stepped up and fought for the freedom and liberty of others without ever asking for something in return. I would argue that Iraq was a horrible response to 9/11, had nothing to do with the actual existential threats against the homeland that was George W. Bush trying to rectify a mistake that his father didn't actually make, which was take over, Saddam Hussein's empire. We got next to nothing. We lost 30,000 American troops. We spent $2 trillion we didn't have, and we helped create ISIS to boot. So imposing American ideas worldwide is not something that I would ever advocate for. But when the chips are down, for example, in World War II, and the Nazi Empire is on the march, and they're 16 miles away from Moscow, and Winston Churchill is on his hands and knees begging FDR to send troops, then we send 500,000 ground troops to go through Normandy. We stepped up, right, and we helped push back European fascism. So look, there's been a lot of mistakes. Some of our incursions in Central America were total disasters, but net positive, America's decisions throughout the 20th century have helped advance human freedom and release people from bondage.
So to that end, you must love what Trump's doing with the UN, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. Are you kidding?
Nikki Haley is a freaking all-star. I mean, I would vote
Here's what I love about
tomorrow.
Nikki Haley, and to my leftist people watching this, how can you not recognize she is everything you pretend to advocate for? No, seriously. She's a daughter of an immigrant. She's a minority. And she's Indian, like from actual India, right? Which is one of their, I think, oppression Olympics groups.
Right. Well, you saw this thing like a couple of weeks ago where they were trying to mock her for using the name Nikki. And it's like, that's what her parents called her,
I know.
you idiot.
Imagine if a Republican said that. There'd be marches in the street. She's totally self-made. Her father literally owned convenience stores, started as a state senator, ran as an insurgent for governor, twice elected, eradicated the Confederate flag from her state capital, balanced the budget, created South Carolina into this unbelievably prosperous state in a very complicated political state, by the way. By the way, they always say, the South is so racist. Well, they twice elected, a woman minority governor of a state that you call, the new, Confederacy. Anyway.
What about that Tim Scott guy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's only two African-American senators, and one of them's from what they call one of the most racist states in the country. That's beside the point. Then she gets selected by President Trump, who supposedly hates women, but he has them represent us in the UN, to go fiercely fight against all these globalist forces at the UN, cuts aid to Pakistan. She is what the left is supposed to love, right? Yeah. She is this absolute embodiment of modern day feminism. Yeah. Yet they hate her.
Did you see this tweet the other day by the @Democrats, the official?
Oh yeah, all the check marks.
Yeah, women.
How about qualified woman?
But that of course that's like the blanket response. But the best was, so it was like minority women, brown women, blah, blah, blah. The amount of people who just wrote, "All right, you're endorsing Nikki Haley," and it's like, man, you guys. This is what you idiots have created.
That's right. They are, and I can't tell you. It's really interesting because so many of our Turning Point members and our Turning Point students, I say, "Why are you conservative?" I'm a student. I'm not conservative because of the left. I left the left because of the left, because they have lost their freaking mind. Like, if they were just like normal Democrats and didn't say the stupid stuff and have intersectionality politics, and like they argued like, well, we can run government better, but free enterprise is a good thing, but flawed, and we need to perfect it. And if they actually had some humility for it, instead of just like embracing cultural Marxism and doing the oppression Olympics, I think you might still be on the left. Instead, they've created the greatest gift. Thank you, liberals, for doing this, leftists, because now we have like former Bernie Sanders supporters running our chapters, because they are now cultural Marxists that look at people by the color of their skin, by how much value they have in the world, or how great you can understand someone's degree of suffering, which is everything that Martin Luther King argued against, which is everything that is fundamentally created this country. And so thank you, leftists, for helping create this movement for us.
Are there any good Democrats left?
Oh, sure there are.
Look, I have my issues with plenty of Republicans, and I'd be more of a Rand Paul Republican and a libertarian.
Welcome aboard. Join the I call them the Sith evil empire. You could join the the real resistance.
The real resistance. I mean, look, for the stuff that I like about Rand Paul, obviously, is all the libertarians.
Of course.
Sadly, in that collection of 18 people that were running against Trump, he was seemingly on the wrong stage. It just, the party had nothing to do with at that time what he wanted, even if, as you've said before, Trump may be doing a lot of those things right now, which show you how complex this whole
very complex
thing is.
But the question I think you had was about the new generation, like any good Democrats.
Yeah, is there anyone now that you think is...
I'm still looking for that kind of like blue dog Democrat to rise up and be like, I'm a Democrat that is pro-choice, which I disagree with, whatever, that is, all these things, but I still think America's a great country, and we need to like rid our country of Antifa. Alan Dershowitz is probably the only one I could think of right now. Who's, by the way, he's getting kicked out of the Democrat Party.
I mean, the abuse he's taking. I'm saying this every week on the show.
Since when has it been a bad thing to be Alan Dershowitz? I mean, the guy is freaking brilliant. Like, you might disagree with him, but he's like the smartest lawyer and human rights attorney that you could possibly find. And now the Democrats are being like, he's being paid by the Trump campaign. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, he's brilliant, and they're kicking him out.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I love that, man. So yeah, there are some good Democrats out there.
Charlie, I suspect we could do this for a couple more hours, but I'm only going to ask you one more because I want this on the record on this show, because when it happens, it should be that I asked it first. You're going to run for something,
No,
right?
I'm not. No. Not for political office. I want to be a commentator and a movement driver.
Does that have anything to do with the clown show that running is? That a guy like you, who you obviously have a great understanding of the issues, you have a consistent line of thought, whether I agree with you on everything or not.
Far too principled.
No, but there's something to be said for that, right?
I think so.
I mean, that goes to what Gorka said about he's the icebreaker, right?
Yeah, but in all reality, I love what I get to do, seriously. Like, every day I get to create a movement, help facilitate a movement, not create, and say what I want to say, and be able to, have conversations with you on all this stuff. I've met very few Congress people or senators or governors that actually enjoy what they do, seriously. And it's always about meeting with lobbyists or kowtowing to leadership and fundraising. It just makes me sick to my stomach thinking about that. But let's pretend it was a great gig, which some of them seem to like it. I don't know why. They like the corruption or something. Is that really the place where I can do the most amount of good for my worldview? And I would say probably not. No, I'd say, look, Turning Point's doing a great service for the country, I think, right now. I love what I get to do. I've have some influence in helping shape this policy and this agenda, and that doesn't seem like fun to me. It doesn't seem like that would maximize my amount of happiness.
No. All right. Well, I think
it's on the record now.
It's on the record. I still suspect there could be a little movement there.
I hope I don't talk like a politician.
Yeah. I think we're doing a gig together in New Hampshire.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Not too long from now. So when we get
the date
Candace
will be there too.
And Candace Owens will be. Oh, let's just real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Let's just finish talking with about Candace for a moment. So when I met you that day, I referenced that literally a minute before I saw it from a distance. You and Candace talked for about 2 minutes, and then she walked over to me and she's like, I just got a job with Turning Point. Charlie wants me to, help talk to the black community and blah, blah, blah. She's quickly becoming an all-star in this space. I think she escaped some of the YouTube madness, which I'm somewhat aware of, and you may have seen my insane debate with her and Blair White and blah, blah, blah. But she's quickly becoming a real powerhouse.
Total powerhouse.
Because the black community has needed more,
Yes.
the Thomas Sowells and Larry Elders and David Webbs and whoever, Alan West, whoever else there, it's a different generation. She's coming at it from that young place. It's kind of beautiful.
She's unbelievably talented. I've spent a considerable amount of time with her now, minus the 5 minutes I hired her. But she's a passionate, driven person. Look, broader than that, she, like all of us on our team, believe and understand there is a movement happening in this country. And it's something the media will not report. It's something palpable when you experience it. You saw it in Florida. There's something happening in this country.
There was something crazy happening.
And it's almost quasi-spiritual, political. There's something happening because the left has tried for far too long to suppress the movement of ideas and free speech and dialogue and discussion. But what Candace believes, which I'm in full support of and I want to help her in every way possible, is that the African-American community has been totally disserved, for lack of a better term, by the modern Democratic Party, and that they are disproportionately more poor, they're disproportionately in worse circumstances than people of every other ethnic, racial group. But why is that? It's not because America's a more racist country than we were in the 1960s. In fact, no one with a straight face could possibly say that. Yet African Americans are poorer today than they were in the 1960s. So what happened, to use a Hillary Clinton term? America did not get more racist. America got significantly less racist. There's still racism in this country, but a lot of it has been eradicated, if not reversed. What happened is that we, as Americans, supported one of the most, I would say, contentious political and social programs, which was the Great Society, where we de-incentivized the black community from making good choices. We incentivized women to stay single and have babies. We destroyed public sector education by reinforcing the public sector teacher unions and disallowing school choice and rewarding bad teachers and keeping communities perpetually poor. We, I think, really did a disservice by starting this war on police in the last couple of years, which most police officers are there for the betterment of the communities that they police. And we have started this narrative that America is somehow an inherently racist country and African Americans are poor because we're a racist country. The data does not reflect that. It's because we have created a set of government policies and ideas that have not incentivized African Americans to continually make good choices that break out of poverty. And as Ben Shapiro says, you make these three choices, you get married before you have kids, you graduate high school and you get a job, you can break out of poverty in this country. And you can look to all three of those things. We have government programs that either discourage or de-incentivize every one of those choices, especially for African American community. And Candace, growing up from a poor family, growing up as a African American woman in this culture, in this society, can talk about it a lot better than I can. I can only talk about it from an outsider. She's an insider, which in today's time, unfortunately, buys you a lot more institutional credibility, which it really shouldn't.
Right. I mean, that's the irony. It's sort of using identity politics against itself, which you almost have to do.
Which you almost have to do, because I always say this, if I say free enterprise is the greatest way to solve poverty, and Candace says it, it doesn't make it any more lesser true just because she's a black woman, right? Truth is truth no matter who says it, but the left somehow has a value, a lot higher of certain people saying it. But you know what? If identity politics is what we have to play, then so be it. And Candace understands that, especially on college campuses, black students will listen to her a lot more likely than they'll listen to me. And I believe that she can continually build a movement around these core set of ideas and values and principles. And she gets it because she used to be one of them. She used to be a leftist. She understands who these people are and she understands how to fight them and how to persuade. And we're lucky to have her as our Director of Urban Engagement at Turning Point USA.
I know you don't like drug references, but when I had her on, I said, for me it was like the red pill was like, I was like slowly drinking it like tea. She said she snorted it.
All the power to her. As long as it doesn't harm someone else, do whatever you want to do with your life.
I wanted to end with you in a slightly awkward position.
Oh, here we go.
One of your employees.
There we go.
That seemed like
it's very good.
Well, listen, you're doing great stuff. I'm looking
Thank you.
forward to getting out on the road with you. And
well, you're doing awesome stuff.
My mouth hurt at the end of that week because
you were smiling so much.
I literally at one point I could not smile anymore. Candace said.
But weren't our students just great? I mean, they were
great.
just.
And by the way, speaking of standing ovations, I mean, Candace got a massive ovation.
Everyone got a stand. I mean, but here's the thing. That's the diversity of ideas. Is we will give a standing ovation to people even if we don't agree with what they have to say completely, right? And the left won't do that. It's like, get out of my room, get out of our lecture hall. And it's a movement around true tolerance and true discussion of ideas, and we're going to win.
All right. Well, to find out more about Charlie's 2028 campaign for presidency, follow him on the Twitter at Charlie Kirk 11.